I'm Jane. This is the Rainy Janery. Join me on my crafting and sewing adventures. Hi everyone, welcome back. It has been 2 weeks since I've talked to the camera, so if I'm a little rusty, you know why. Today I'm going to be going over all of the pieces from my 18th century outfit. I finished them a couple of weeks ago and wanted a chance to talk you through the whole process since it wasn't something that I filmed when I was actually making it. A couple of housekeeping things before I get started. If you are just here for the pretty gown pictures and don't want to hear all the historical talk, which I totally understand, I will put timestamps down below that you can jump to all the shots of me in each of the costume pieces. Also, just so you know, I have notes below. This whole process happened over the course of a couple of months, so I had to essentially write a script. So if I keep looking down, or if I'm looking down, that's what I'm doing, is I'm checking my notes to make sure I'm giving you all the right information. Also, if you are here from the Laura Kampf podcast, hi, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. I would love to get to know you more. So please leave a comment down below. Let me know where you're from, what you're into, what you're making. Is it snowing where you are yet? I just want to get to know the community of people that's out there. I feel like you all know me really well now because I talked with Laura for an hour, but I don't know who you are, so share down below. I'm excited to chat with you all in the comments. I think the best place to start would be why I chose to make this dress. In a movie full of incredible costumes, why make this gown? I think it started when I met my husband and we were planning our wedding, and this gown was one that I had pinned as inspiration for a wedding gown. Also, my favorite color is white. It was already my favorite color. So as COVID started and I was looking around for something to occupy my time, I was watching all of the makers on YouTube and knew I had to, be a part of the movement and make something myself. And this dress just jumped out as the most fun, the most challenging, and something that I really wanted to have as part of my personal collection. So the next step, now that I had picked what I wanted to make, was research. What is the dress? How is it made? What exactly was the date of the dress? So the first thing I did was rewatch the film. I think the clip where she wanders around in the field and goes to the Queen's Hamlet, I think it's maybe a 2-minute clip. I binge watched that 2 minutes over and over again and tried to glean every tiny piece of information I could out of all of the angles that you see of the dress. I dug through the internet. I found every image I could find of the gown. I did learn that this gown seems to appear in multiple shots of that 2-minute montage in many different disguises. At one point, they put a sash around it. Another point, the front closure gets ruffles. Lastly, I think there's one scene where it seems to be the same gown and they've put a caraco jacket over the top of it. The next thing to try and figure out when one is considering building this piece was, what kind of gown is it? It very easily appears to be a chemise a la reine. It has the white neck ruffle, the sheerness to it, but it very much is not a chemise a la reine. Here's a chemise a la reine, and here is the gown next to it. Obviously, a chemise a la reine is gathered all the way across the front of the bodice, and this very much has a fitted bodice that she's wearing over stays. I knew it wasn't a chemise a la reine, but it is evocative of one and is about the right time period in her history that she would have worn a chemise a la reine. But on the other side of the coin, it's not a robe a la française or a robe à l'anglaise either, which were the sort of more general styles that people would have worn at that time. You can see that the back of the dress isn't continuous like a robe à l'anglaise, but it's also not pointed at the back like an Italian gown. The seam between the bodice and the skirt is straight across. There's also no opening at the front of the skirt, which led me down the path of an 18th century round gown. They were a middle class to lower class gown. I think it makes sense for this scene. Marie has asked for something more comfortable and casual than the formal court clothes that she is used to wearing. So a round gown in the 18th century would have had a closed skirt in the front. It didn't have the bodice on top with an open petticoat. So I'm going around and around trying to figure out what this gown actually is. There was something about it that still felt funny. It didn't seem to cohese as one piece. And I found this frame, right? You can actually see the bodice is not connected to any of the rest of the pieces. So this is very much a costume piece. So I think what they did was they made a petticoat, a bodice with no sleeves, and then she's wearing something underneath we have no idea that the sleeves are attached to. The other evidence I have that sort of reinforced it is later when they're at the Queen's Hamlet, she is wearing the same skirt. She's wearing a caraco jacket over the top, but it doesn't appear as though she's wearing the caraco jacket over the top of the bodice and sleeves that she was already wearing. There isn't a lot of padding between the jacket and her stays. So I think the petticoat is a separate piece, the caraco jacket is a separate piece, the bodice is a separate piece, and they just mixed them and matched them as they needed. But what this really did for me was freed me up to not worry quite so much about being 150% historically accurate and making the exact gown. I could make my version of this gown. So in this next part, I will break down each of the individual pieces and how I made them. If I don't go into detail enough about something, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd be happy to have a chat about it. This is just sort of my general memories of what I did and how I made all the pieces. The chemise. This single garment galvanized more about this project than any other piece, which seems like a very dramatic thing to say, but was incredibly true. Not only was it the first piece of clothing I had ever made for myself, it was the first piece of clothing I had made in quite a few years, but it also was so off the mark of the actual traditional chemise that it ended up taking me 6 mock-ups to make one undergarment. It was incredibly frustrating to make for something that seems like it should be a bunch of straight lines and some really simple sewing. Looking back, I probably overcomplicated it way more than I needed to, but I had so many ideas about how I was going to take something historical and, make it fit this modern costume piece, and I did not have the skill at that time to mesh those two things at all. A typical chemise of this time included sleeves, which wouldn't work because the sleeves of the gown in the film are transparent. You can very much see her arms through them. So in the end, the only thing that is even remotely historically accurate about this is basically the fabric. It's made of a really lightweight 3.4 ounce linen. It doesn't even particularly fit me very well. Frankly, it's way too tight. I thought the only way that I could get it to fit underneath my stays was to have it be as sort of skin tight as possible. Also, because I did 6 mock-ups and used up an incredible amount of fabric, it's probably at least 6 inches shorter than it should be. It does almost come down to my knees, but is not nearly the length that it should be. It does the job it needs to underneath my clothes, which is keeping my stays from rubbing into my skin. The stays. To make the stays, I used the American Duchess Simplicity, I think it's 8162 pattern, but I also followed a lot of YouTube and blog tutorials about how other people had done it. So I feel like I had a great understanding of the steps in the process, especially because the Simplicity pattern, the steps kind of go in the wrong order if you're trying to make a very traditional set of stays. For this piece, I only really needed 2 mock-ups. I did some tweaks to the body length and some of the curves. I also made them front lacing as opposed to front and back lacing. The Simplicity pattern does state that it has negative ease in it, which for a big 4 pattern is is a lot. Typically, big four patterns have way too much ease built into them, but I do still think that I could have taken more out of it. Right now, I am not at my lightest weight, and I can lace them all the way closed, which means I probably could stand to make them smaller. I used a canvas weight linen for the exterior and a lighter weight linen as the interfacing and also as the lining. The stays are boned with zip ties, which for now is great. I may upgrade at a later date to actual synthetic whalebone, but for now, the zip ties are great. They do their job. They flex with me as much as I need them to. And, you know, I only spent, I think, maybe $3. So originally, I really wanted to use chamois leather. I was very inspired by a pair that American Duchess had on their blog, and she'd done this beautiful work with chamois leather binding. I found some gorgeous white chamois grade leather, but the problem with it ended up being that it had a coating on one side that wasn't the leather texture, and I think also the leather was thicker than it really should have been. So eventually I got sick of the way the leather looked, and I didn't really like the way that it felt. I have a clip of me replacing it that I'll put in right now. So these are my 18th century stays, and I originally bound them in this sort of chamois leather that I got from Penny River on Etsy. It's really beautiful, but it just did not give me the effect that I wanted. I'm not really big on the wrinkling, and it just sort of looks bulky and awkward at the corners where I had to clip it to fit. It just, because of the white coating on the top, it wasn't as stretchy as bias tape is. So I am in the process of removing it. Here I am seam ripping it all off, and then I have made this lovely pile of linen bias tape that I'm hopefully going to put on the edge instead. I ended up making the straps that wrapped all the way around my body, as opposed to the straps that just tie in the front. And the reason I made that choice was I have very sloping shoulders, and I also am very round shouldered in the back. So I often have, even with traditional bras, I have a hard time keeping the straps on. So I figured the straps crossing around the back and then tying in the front would not only help my posture when I'm wearing the gown, but it would help keep the straps on my body. The first petticoat. So the first petticoat I started essentially what ended up being the height of COVID. It was April 2020. And I started ordering materials and could not get anything from anybody. I ended up with a white flannel, and it's a great fabric. It just isn't exactly what I wanted. I would have loved to have something a little bit stiffer that helped to hold the skirts out slightly more. The sewing process for this petticoat was extremely simple. I followed the Burnley and Trowbridge sew long video for making a petticoat. I'll try and link it down below for you. The bum pads. The bum pads ended up being another one of those controversial pieces that I expected to be really simple just to whip out, and ended up remaking a whole bunch, and I'm still not even sure if I did them right or if I need them. I started with the Simplicity 8162 pattern. I made them as they were spec'd, and they ended up being too large and not the right shape. They almost gave the gown like a farthingale look. So I cut those down and made a smaller set of pads that give me slightly more shape, but aren't nearly as dramatic. Again, if you look at the gown in the film, you can tell she has some padding in there, but it's not as dramatic as like a set of pocket hoops or pannier. So I figured for me and my shape that these smaller little quilted pads would work just fine. I think I just got on a roll with making all the things that I convinced myself that I really need the hip pads, but when I made the rest of the gown, I draped all of the petticoats with the hip pads on, and I really don't want to go through, completely rip all of the petticoats apart and re-drape them. So for now they stay. The second petticoat. The second petticoat, the fabric is white cotton Matelasse. Maybe it's Matelasse, I'm not exactly sure. It is a beautiful weight fabric. It has all the body. It folds in beautiful soft folds. It has that like gorgeous quilted stiffness to it. The one thing I will say is if you have a serger, please serge this fabric. I'll put a shot in here. I had hand sewed this petticoat together and it is still fraying to this day. It just frays and frays and frays and frays like crazy. So be prepared. If you buy this fabric, I got it from Renaissance Fabrics online. It's gorgeous, totally worth it. Just be prepared to really, really bind your edges. Otherwise you're gonna end up with a haystack inside your gown. The second petticoat was as easy as the first. Again, I followed the same tutorial. Once I made the first one, it was really easy to make the second one. The gown. After spending a very long time looking for floral voile and running into nothing but either children's fabric or fabric that had the wrong proportion flowers or something that looked like 1980s curtains, I just gave up on trying to do floral. So instead I chose a voile that had a very, very tiny stripe to it. Some of her silk gowns have a very petite stripe to them, so I figured it sort of evoked other gowns, even if it wasn't an exact match in the fabric. The gown is lined in Kona cotton, which was cheaper than linen, and at that point, finances were important, so I chose to go with the cotton instead. So I got the American Duchess book and tried to use the pattern for the Italian gown, planned to make a few modifications to it to make more of a round gown style instead. I tried to transfer the pattern out of the book and could not make it work. The gown in the book is a very specific size, and which is not my size, but it ended up being far too difficult to size up. Instead, essentially draped the pattern onto my dress form. Eventually, my friend was able to come over and help me fit the bodice lining. And then from there, it was just doubling the pattern and making the outer bodice. The interior had a double front that allowed it to be pulled closed tightly, and then the bodice front is pinned over the top. Does pinning a bodice front terrify anyone else? Scares the bejesus out of me sticking pins into myself like that. If anyone can do a tutorial, Abby Cox, I'm looking at you. If anyone can do a tutorial on like in depth with very close-up cameras on how you actually pin a bodice front, I would genuinely appreciate it because I don't properly understand how that process works. The sleeves were patterned off of the American Duchess book as well. The only difference in them is that they're completely sheer. So I had to turn under all the edges of the arm's eye and make sure that any extra seams were hidden and fell down or whipped down so that I didn't have bulky seams. And those are all the pieces of my gown. As you can see, I'm missing a few things. I ordered a pair of shoes from American Duchess, but they are not due until late November, early December. So once those come in, I will put up some more official shots of me in the gown on my Instagram. So go follow me on Instagram. And lastly, the piece that I feel is missing and is not in the film is a hat. I, at some point, will be doing a video on some millinery and making a hat to match the dress. So during this entire process, the question that I got asked the most when I told people I was working on it was, yeah, but where are you gonna wear it? And I never really knew how to answer. And I guess the easiest answer would be to say, you know, someday I'll go to costume college and I'll wear it at costume college. But I don't think I ever actually made this gown with the intention of wearing it anywhere. It was more about the process of making it than about what it would even look like on me when I was done. Where am I gonna wear this? I have no idea. I felt strange enough wearing it outside of my apartment to shoot the shots for this. I would love to hear down below if you have a project like that where it's not about It's not about the finishing the thing, it's about the process and the journey and the education of making. Again, make sure you leave a comment down below, tell me where you're from and what you're making. If you like this, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe, and join me again for more crafting, costuming, and lots of fun. See you soon.